Temple in Independence, Missouri. Welcome back to CIMM Sessions, our little bite-sized servings of theology, culture, and community of Christ, identity, mission, message, and beliefs. I'm David Lloyd, the director of the CIMM, the Center for Innovation for Ministry and Mission, through the Graceland and Community of Christ Seminary. Welcome back. We're glad to have Kelly Phipps with us again today. Kelly's a church member who lives in Lee Summit, who has been actively engaged in the process of helping our leadership in decision making and growing together as a church through common consent. This is part 2 of the series Deciding Together in the Church. This is also part of the feel that we've had during the fall of ways that we can get along better in the church over the many different issues that we have. We are not homogeneous in any way as a group of people in the congregation, and we have differences of opinion, and that's the way God created us. And we can find it a strength as much as we can make it into a weakness. And Kelly's going to talk to us a little bit more today of the 6 steps he talked about last week and how those can work within your congregation. So I'm looking forward to that with everyone here. Again, if you have a question during Kelly's presentation, please put it in the chat below, and we'll take a look at it and hopefully use it in the question and answer period that follows his presentation. So welcome back, Kelly. It's good to have you with us, and take it away.
Thanks so much, David. It's a pleasure to be here with you again this week. So last week we started our conversation about deciding together collaboratively in church contexts. And a reminder, part of why I'm here presenting on this topic is we've been experimenting with the common consent process at World Conference. And one of the things I've heard a lot is that there's a desire to use some of those processes in mission centers and congregations. And so this week, I'm going to walk you through what that might look like for a congregation or a mission center to take some of those, what I introduced last week with the 6 steps, and use them to make decisions together. So this week, we're going to build on those 6 steps and go deeper. And we're going to work our way through a hypothetical example. But before I get into that example, I want to review again when it might be useful to use these 6 steps. So last week, we talked a little bit about why it's so challenging to make decisions together in a congregational or a church setting. There's no shortage of things that can divide a church. In my looking back over the church divisions I've witnessed, in a congregational setting, it's often things that we have differences of opinion about. So things like carpet color, pews versus chairs, campgrounds, buildings, those sort of things we all tend to view differently. And so those are areas that are ripe for conflict. And so they're also ripe for using this decision-making process. The process isn't limited to just those kinds of conflicts, but those are the areas where I often see congregations getting into deep divisions. So like we talked about last week, collaboration is a big investment of time and energy. So if I'm trying to figure out if it's worth the time and effort to use something like these 6 steps with a group, I ask myself 3 questions. First one is the topic we're discussing an important one? Second, is there a specific proposal before the group? And third, is there a diversity of perspectives about that proposal? So if there's a proposal on a topic that matters and the people are divided, it's probably, in my mind, worth investing the time to use a process like this. So we're going to use a hypothetical, and the one we're going to consider is the same one I use in the resource that I shared last week. So if you looked at that resource, this may look familiar. But the hypothetical is a congregation that wants to hire a full-time pastor. It's obviously an important decision, and we can see how people might have a diversity of perspectives on that decision. So we're going to work our way through the 6 steps and see how they might be applied to a challenging question like this one. Now, it's important to note first that the starting point for using these 6 steps is a specific proposal. The reason I'm emphasizing that is that the way people think about a topic varies widely depending on the specifics at hand. So if we don't have a specific proposal before us, it's easy for people to talk past one another, and it's difficult for people to give constructive input. They need something specific to respond to. So we begin the 6-step process once there's a proposal under consideration. So I'm going to share my slides now, and I'll share with you the hypothetical proposal that we're going to work our way through tonight. So the hypothetical proposal at hand, get my slides to advance for some reason. There we go. So here's our hypothetical proposal. The congregation should hire a full-time pastor with the first 3 years of salary and benefits paid from the proceeds of a recent sale of real estate owned by the church. So that's the proposal we're going to imagine we're working our way through. As we work our way through this example, I want you to pay close attention to what we learn in the process. Here at the beginning, before we've gathered any information, all we really know is the group is divided. And when all we know is the group is divided, it's very easy to allow ourselves to focus on the question of whether it's likely to pass or not, because all we know is there's division. So that's the kind of the question that comes to mind. But instead, I want us to focus on, we're going to turn our focus to helping the group listen to one another and learn from each other so we can refine the proposal. And our goal in refining the proposal is to have it best represent the will of the group. So as we work our way through the steps, I want you to pay close attention to how your perception of this group's challenge changes as we learn more. Last week, I said sometimes I refer to this process as a map and a mirror. The map is the sequential steps we go through. The mirror is the way it reflects back for the group what's really happening behind the scenes for people. So as we work our way through the map and the mirror process, we're going to learn a lot more about what matters to this group. So when we apply the 6 steps to this proposal, the first question we're going to consider as a group is, what perspectives are held within the group on this proposal? So I want to remind you of something I talked about last week. We begin by focusing the attention of the group on understanding. This does a couple of things for us. First one is it moves us away from predicting whether we think there's enough support for the proposal to pass. Sometimes it's really tempting to start out by taking a straw poll just to see whether we really need to keep working at it or whether it's likely to pass. But that can really backfire for a group. I was thinking about this a few weeks ago. I was at a congregational gathering, and my wife was leading this, and it was a social activity. And so she was doing mixers. And in this mixer, she was doing an activity we've all been a part of, where it's like, if you like chocolate ice cream, move to this side of the room. If you like vanilla ice cream, move to this side of the room. So we were doing this lighthearted exercise. And as David mentioned, I live in the Kansas City area. And in one of the questions, she said, if you like the Chiefs, move to this side of the room. If you don't like the Chiefs, move to this side of the room. I didn't realize what a precarious question that was until I found myself one of only 2 people on the wrong side of the room. And suddenly this lighthearted activity got really serious. And everybody started asking, why don't you like the Chiefs? Well, I don't dislike the Chiefs. I just don't follow football that much. And I probably should have rethought the way I chose to position myself in the room. But the reason I share this story is when you take a straw poll on a divisive question, that's what happens in the group. Suddenly, everyone is acutely aware of how many people are in favor and how many people are opposed. And all of your efforts to get people to listen to one another are washed away because everyone's counting votes. So we start the process not because we don't care about the votes, but because we care first about what people are thinking. So that's why we start we don't start with a straw poll. We start by asking what perspectives are held. The second reason we start here is because any group that is deeply divided is likely been hearing from a few very vocal people and hearing a lot from those people. But we want to make sure that we hear a wide array of perspectives and not just the most vocal people. So we're going to start by making sure that all of those perspectives are being heard. Now, how you go about doing that, gathering all those perspectives, is a little beyond what we can cover tonight. But I do go into that more in detail in the resource that I shared last week. And I'll share it again before we finish tonight. Some options for how you might gather these perspectives would be a town hall format, survey, focus groups, really any way that you can create a safe environment for people to really share what's important to them. And so it's really about setting up a listening environment. For our hypothetical, I'm going to imagine that we've held a group meeting and we're having an open mic. We're hearing perspectives, and we have our trained facilitator keeping good notes and summarizing those perspectives. So in order for this hypothetical to make sense, I want us to imagine what we might hear if we ask this question. So if we asked what perspectives are held within the group on this proposal, I want you to imagine in your mind's eye that we've got a microphone up front and a line of people come up ready to share their thoughts on whether we should hire a pastor and pay for the first 3 years of salary and benefits from sale of proceeds from real estate. So what might people say about that? The leadership of this congregation is aging, and if we don't have a young leader that can attract younger members, we're not going to survive. The proposal only covers the salary of a pastor for 3 years. I don't think we'll be able to afford that increase in our budget in 3 years, and I don't think it's fair to hire someone we don't have a plan to keep their position longer than 3 years. We need a pastor who's trained to be a pastor, or else we're not going to grow. Why do we have to start with a full-time pastor? Wouldn't it be wiser to start with a part-time pastor and see if we really need someone full-time? There's so many opportunities for ministry we're not able to pursue because we're all volunteers. Having a paid pastor would give us the chance to try some new forms of outreach we can't do right now. That money shouldn't be spent on a short-term plan. We should be using it to start an endowment so we can use the interest to support ministries indefinitely. If we hire a full-time pastor, I'm afraid the volunteers who have been running the church will either think they're not needed or stop volunteering. I'm afraid we'll overcommit on our budget and end up not having the money to continue the position when the money from the sale runs out. If we can't support the pastor past 3 years, won't it be more difficult to return to volunteer leadership after having a paid pastor? Most of our energy as a church goes to just keeping the doors open. If we want to do outreach or expanded ministry, we're going to need a paid pastor. So, for any of you who have led a congregational business meeting, this may have caused flashbacks for you, and I apologize for that. We've all been in that position where this flood of information is coming at us, and you can feel the tension of the group going up. But I want to just take a moment and reflect on these perspectives. Every one of them raises a valid point. They are the things we should be thinking about and talking about. When a group begins with the vote or some sort of a straw poll, the tenor of the group becomes about us and them, who's winning. But when a meeting is about listening, the tenor of the group can become one in which we're all in this together, where everyone has the best interest of the group at heart. And that's really the objective of this step, is for us to listen together and honor all of the perspectives that exist within the group. So let's move on to the second step. The second step is where we ask the question, how widely are these perspectives held within the group? Now, this step is important because it moves us into the nuance of the issue. In this first step, we heard a wide array of opinions, but in order to move into the second step, we're going to need to distill that long list of opinions into the most frequent or prominent perspectives. So this is where a skilled facilitator comes in really handy. Someone needs to find the themes and state those perspectives in a short, succinct way that creates a shared summary of what was heard. So that shared summary then serves as the basis for this second step when we say, how widely are these perspectives held? So we're not asking people to vote for these perspectives, but rather we're going to ask them to tell us about all of the ones they agree with. So here's an example of what that open mic time might translate into as a list of short perspectives. Now, you can see that my goal here is to try to get each one of them down to a short sentence that captures the nugget of what the concern or the idea being shared was. So in this step, we're going to ask how widely are these perspectives held? And in this step helps us see where the group as a whole is on the question, rather than pushing us toward yes or no. In reality, most of us probably would agree with several of these, and that's really the objective. We want to not just say pick one, that everyone may have multiples, and so you could pick up to all of them that you agree with. So if I were to ask this, well, first of all, I distilled this into themes, and if I asked people to select all they agreed with, we might see a response like this. And I hope you're able to see that on the side. I've put a bar chart over on the side. And in that bar chart, you can see that there are a couple of perspectives that lots of people gathered around. Now, I've done just sort of a simple bar chart here, and if you're doing a survey electronically, that's very easy to do. When I'm doing this in person, I found a very simple way to do this, and you've probably all seen this. I use stickers or Post-its. I'll put this list up and I'll ask people over a break to put a Post-it next to every one of the perspectives that resonates for them. And then once everybody's got all their stickers up there, I simply rearrange them to make a bar chart so that next to each one of these, you can see a visual representation of how many people shared that perspective. So again, how this information is gathered is part of a larger conversation, but for our purposes here, I'm just showing a very simple way, just a bar chart made out of stickers. So this step, again, not about making a decision, but it's about helping the group understand what's important to people. And we can see from this one that the big concerns for the congregation are helping the group prepare for growth and a concern about the sustainability of the budget. The other perspectives still matter and need to be addressed, but this gives us a picture. Again, we can think of it as holding up a mirror to help us understand what the congregation is thinking as a group. So now we're going to move to our third step, which is to ask what level of support is there for the proposal in its current form. Now we can see, now that we can see what the concerns are, now it's an appropriate time for us to start asking, how well does this proposal align with the will of the group? But we're not just going to ask yes or no. We're going to ask people to give we're going to give people the opportunity to express their support on a scale. Any of you who have been at World Conference are familiar with this scale. We've been using it for a number of years. But when I use it in small groups, I'll do a simple 1 to 5. Sometimes I'll even just have people hold up their hands, like hold up how many fingers, and I'll just do a quick temperature check with the group. How much support is there for this idea? But here, we're going to use this 1 to 5 scale. And it's important to point out that this scale is measuring the level of support. So the level of support goes from no support to full support. But some people just don't know, or they don't want to take a stance, and that's fine. So we have this option of undecided there at the end. So this allows us to capture some of the nuance in how people may be feeling. Maybe fully supportive, they may have reservations, conflicted, or mostly opposed. They get to pick where they are on that spectrum. So if I ask this question of our hypothetical congregation, and then I gather their responses, this is what I imagine I might see. So as you can see, if you're not able to see the numbers on there because of our letterbox video screen, we've got 9% full support, 15% little support, 35% moderate support, 22% significant support, 12% full support, and 7% undecided. So this gives us, again, a better sense of how much support there is within the group. Now, I'm not counting votes, but if I look at this, what it tells me is about 3/4 of the group has moderate to full support. What that tells me is there's about 25% of the group that still have strong reservations. So we've not arrived there. The whole group's not pointed in one direction. There are concerns to address, but it tells me that the support there's enough support there that we probably want to keep working on the proposal. So at this stage, we're looking beyond for or against. Let's move to our next question. So our next question is, what are the primary reasons behind your level of support? So at this stage, we're looking beyond for or against, and we're trying to understand the reasons why. If you weren't here last week, I want to explain again why this question is so important. The research on decision making tells us that when we focus on our reasons why first, we're far more likely to be able to reach a collaborative decision together. If we start with for or against, we're likely to end up at an impasse. So we're really focusing here on the question why. Tell us your reason why. Now, I'll be honest, this question is one of the more challenging questions to implement. And the reason is, how do you go about talking about people's reason why when you've got a large group? That's the real challenge. And so because of that challenge, I fully acknowledge this step is an imperfect process. It's just impractical to have each person come to the microphone and explain why they have their level of support. And many people report they have multiple reasons. But if the group is willing to just suspend that awkwardness for a little bit and focus for a moment on their primary reason that they hold their level of support, even though it's imperfect, it can give us a snapshot of what issues are most important to the group and allows us to focus our attention where we need to work. So for this step, we're going to use the same list of perspectives we had before. There were 9 and then an other. And we're going to ask people to identify the one that most closely explains why they hold that level of support. So using our proposal to hire a pastor, we might see results that look like this. So for people whose level of support is 1 or 2, they might report that their reasons for holding that level of support are concern for sustainability of the budget and a belief that the money should go into an endowment. And there may be other reasons, something we didn't capture in our list, and that's perfectly fine. We want to hear about that. For groups that are, for the group that is, has a level of support of 3, which is moderate support, or undecided, they might say that their primary reasons are concern for sustainability of the budget and a concern for the effect on volunteer leaders and a question about whether the pastor needs to be full-time. For those whose level of support is 4 or 5, they might say that their primary reasons were that full-time leadership is required for us to grow. We need a leader who's seminary trained, and opportunities are being missed. Now, you'll notice that I grouped these results based on their level of support for the proposal. I did that because the real power in this step comes from avoiding assumptions that we are likely to make about those with whom we disagree. If I know that I'm in favor of hiring a full-time pastor because I'm concerned about the church's future, and all I know is that you're opposed to it, but I don't know why, it's very easy for me to assume that your reason for being opposed is the opposite of my reason for being in favor. So if I'm in favor because I'm concerned about the future of the congregation, you must be opposed because you don't care about the future of the congregation. Now, the chances of that are pretty slim, right? Nobody's likely to not care about the congregation, but in the absence of any real information, it's easy to assume that others want the opposite result for the opposite reasons. So what this step forces us to do, in a very imperfect way, is to take a moment and consider what's important to those we disagree with. And that step alone makes it worth the time and energy to invest in. Because what it does is it creates a moment for us to stop and listen to those on the opposite end of the spectrum from us. If I am fully opposed, I need to know, why are people so in favor of this idea, and vice versa. Now you'll notice that I've included percentages with each of these responses. The 3 reasons that I've listed, I just picked the 3 that I thought would be the most likely. And when I'm doing this with a group, I normally just pick the top 3. But the percentages show us what percentage that is of the overall group. So in other words, it may be one of the most common responses for this particular group, but still represent a very small portion of the whole group. So by including those percentages, it allows us to keep those perspectives in perspective. So these results give us a glimpse into the perspectives of those at each level of support and gives us a clue on what might increase support for the proposal. And that's really where the next step takes us. So the next step is, what concerns are limiting your support for the proposal? Now, this is where we invite people to share how they might see opportunity to improve the proposal. Now, I haven't really talked yet about a group that's important here, so I'm going to take a moment and introduce something I refer to as the refinement team. So all along, as we're gathering this information, somebody needs to be keeping notes and taking a good record of what we're learning about the will of the group as we go. And that's really when the Common Consent team worked on a version of this for World Conference, we named that group the refinement team. And the idea was that there would be a group of people who followed the proposal all the way through this process and listened carefully to what people liked and what people saw as opportunities for improvement. And then that group would be charged with taking the proposal as it exists and trying to improve it using what we learned from the group. So that group ideally then has the benefit of knowing what the concerns are, but also what people liked in the proposal. So if we return to our open mic and ask people what are your concerns that are limiting support for the proposal, here's some things I imagine we might hear. I'm concerned that we'll hire someone for 3 years, and then in the 4th year, our budget will either have to increase dramatically or we'll have to lay them off. I don't think it's fair to hire someone without telling them that we only have funding for 3 years. Hiring someone will require a change in the way we think about ourselves as volunteers. What if the person we hire doesn't understand how we've been functioning? So, up to this point in the process, we've been following a very prescribed process, but like one step after another. This is where it gets a little murkier. What comes next is the process of refining the proposal, but it's not likely to be just a one-time refinement. It may be that the group refines the proposal, brings it back, hears more input, makes further refinement. The idea is that this is a conversation of gathering input and continuing to refine the proposal until at some point the group is ready to move forward. And that is the 6th step, asking the group, is the group ready to make a decision? Have we finished our refinement of the proposal? But in this situation, I want to show how a group might have refined this proposal to address the concerns that were raised. So we've heard all along about all of these concerns, and then we hand this over to the refinement team. So how might they improve this proposal? So we've got our original proposal, and the idea here is that they would start with that and then build on it. So what they might add to it would be in year 1, full salary and benefits will be paid for out of the real estate proceeds. In year 2, 2/3 of the salary and benefits will be paid out of the real estate, with the remaining balance to be incorporated into the annual budget. Year 3, 1/3 of the salary and benefits will be paid out of the proceeds, the remaining balance incorporated in the annual budget. And during year 3, leadership team will meet to determine whether the church can fully support the pastor position or if a change is necessary for year 4. The funding plan should be explained to all applicants before they're interviewed so they have clear expectations about the position. And the job description of the pastor will include language that describes the role as directing the work of volunteers to make clear that the pastor is not replacing volunteers, but rather coordinating them. So I'm going to stop sharing for a moment. So hopefully in that example, you were able to see how the proposal kind of morphed and was refined in ways that addressed the most prominent reservations while retaining what people liked about the proposal. So when I'm working with groups outside the church and I use this process, that's why I call it collaborative refinement. As I explained last week, common consent, that term, common consent, is very tied to our religious tradition. And so I needed a non-religious title to use with other groups. And that's why I call it collaborative refinement. So for those of you, I just want to take a break here for a second. For those of you who are very efficiency oriented, and I know that is many of you, I want to acknowledge and honor the fact that you may be looking at that refined proposal and think, I could have come up with that so much faster than that, going through all of those steps. And I don't think you're wrong. I completely agree with you. As I said last week, this process is a big commitment of time. However, the benefit of the process is more than just the outcome. A group that takes the time to listen to perspectives and refine the proposal together is a group that in the end is going to be deeply invested in the outcome. And even those who might disagree with the outcome can feel like their concerns were heard and taken seriously. And that makes a difference for groups. So for simplicity's sake, I sometimes refer to this process as a way of making difficult decisions together. But in reality, that's kind of an oversimplification. It is a way to make difficult decisions together, but there are lots of ways of doing that. What's unique about this process is it's a way to bring a group together through the process, understand one another, and work together toward a shared solution. I think of it as a decision-making process that both strengthens the group and improves the decision. And because of that, it's worth the investment of time when the topics are important and worth it for the group to invest in. But I should also at this point mention that fully acknowledge this is not the only way of deciding together. Our church has been experimenting with lots of decision-making processes, including discernment. And we've seen lots of exciting applications of discernment in our movement lately. And I want to take a moment and address how I see these 6 steps relating to a discernment process. And I should acknowledge up front too, these aren't just my thoughts. I sat down with Katie Harmon McLaughlin to really think through how does discernment and these 6 steps relate to one another. What I'm going to share with you is my opinion, but it's an opinion that's informed by others in our movement who are far more skilled at discernment than I am. So my understanding of discernment is it's a way that groups can seek together where God is calling them to respond. So that's discernment. The 6 steps I've described here don't really expressly incorporate an element of understanding God's will, but those questions can be included. In fact, I encourage groups to include discernment in their process. I just haven't included it in the 6 steps because this process can be used by any membership groups, not just churches. And some churches may not want to include discernment in every decision-making process. So in thinking about when you would use the 6 steps versus when you'd use discernment, for me, it really comes down to a couple of factors to think about. The first one is, what is your group trying to learn? Discernment is about listening together to understand God's will for the group. The 6 steps, in contrast, are about refining a proposal using the wisdom of the group. One looks for the divine pull, the other looks to the wisdom in the assembly. I sometimes joke that I don't think the divine has a strong opinion about the color of the carpet, but from my experience, many members do. So it really comes down to what if the issue at hand requires both goals or one versus the other. When both goals are important, it's entirely appropriate to use both discernment and the 6 steps together. The second question to think about when you're trying to figure out whether to use discernment or the 6 steps or both is to ask yourself where the group is starting. In discernment, the starting point is to approach a question with an open mind and an open heart, to leave behind any preconceived notions. It begins with a sense of curiosity and an openness to where the Spirit may lead. In contrast, I told you in the 6 steps, we need to start with a clearly defined proposal. So it sort of depends on where your group is beginning the process. So I'm going to share my slides again. And I'm going to share a graphic that sort of lays out how I think about when to use which process. So you can see on this graphic, the questions are at the top, what is the group trying to learn? And at the bottom is where are we starting? So to give you an example of what it would look like to use both processes, a group could begin with an open-ended question and use a discernment process that resulted in a specific proposal. Then the 6 steps could be used to consider that proposal. It would be one way of blending the 2 processes. Another approach would be to begin with a proposal and then while using the 6 steps, intersperse discernment practices as the questions are considered. And so the questions could be reframed to ask something instead of what are your perspectives. You might ask a discernment question in there, something like, where are we feeling called as a group? So I personally view both discernment and the 6 steps as very useful approaches to group decision making. Whether you use one or both really depends on where you're starting in the process and what you're wanting to learn. So I hope that walking through this example has given you kind of a mental picture of what the 6 steps could look like in application. Obviously, it's been a very quick overview of the process, but I want to end with an observation. When I'm working with groups that are involved in conflicted decision making, I often meet with the leaders in advance of any facilitated meeting. And when I'm talking with the leaders, and these are leaders whose group is facing a divisive decision, I can feel the pressure that the leaders feel. They can sense the passion on all sides of the issue, and they want so desperately for the group to be able to reach resolution. And that tension is often really carried by the leaders. In my experience, when people are given the time and the opportunity and the encouragement to listen deeply to one another and given the opportunity to work together, I'm almost always pleasantly surprised at their ability to find a way forward that honors all of the perspectives, the concerns. This process is designed to create that kind of space where people can work together. In my experience, space for collaboration doesn't tend to happen naturally in our group processes. It takes intention, but when we make space for it, it not only diffuses the tension, it relieves the leader of feeling like they need to carry the weight of those decisions, and it leaves the group stronger and better equipped for the next challenging decision. So for those reasons, I believe it's worth the investment of time. So last week, I shared a resource that I wrote. Again, I was hearing from congregations and mission centers that they wanted to try something like the common consent process in their local jurisdiction. And so the resource that I prepared to share with folks, I'm going to share my slides again. It's a fairly simple resource. I think of it as a bookette. It's a short, long brochure, short book, and it's written as a leader's guide. It's all of the stuff I've shared in this presentation, plus a little bit more. That book is available to anyone, to friends and members of Community of Christ. It's available for free. It's on the website decidingtogether.org. When you select the leader's guide, put it in the shopping cart, there's an opportunity to put in a coupon code. The coupon code is C of Christ, and that will reduce the price to $0. It's available as both a PDF and an EPUB. And I forgot to mention last week, please share this link with anyone you think might be interested. It is my intention to have this available widely within our movement to anyone that finds value in it. I get nothing out of this. It's my attempt at trying to share without having to have lots of really long conversations with everyone, introducing them to the process. It's my attempt to bring everyone up to speed with the basics. And then if I can be helpful in applying, I'm happy to have conversations that follow. So with that, I'll hand it back to you, Dave, to see if we've got any questions.
Wonderful, Kelly. Thank you very much, and thank you for making that available to all of us. And I appreciate your presentation tonight. There are a lot of we could talk a long time about these kind of decision-making processes in the church. But I really liked how you went back to our term of common consent and how that's from the beginning of our faith movement. But that concept of common consent has changed. And if you look the process that we have gone through in the church of reaching decisions, you can see the many different ways that we've gone about doing that, and from how in the old days in the chamber, that was the person with the loudest voice got the chair attention. So how do you see this being needed in this time? In the life of the church, and how that can help us in our congregations that way?
Sure. So, in my personal belief is that we are experiencing a transformation, a reimagining of the church that's in many ways being forced on us. And so,
Forced on us culturally, or forced, yeah,
culturally, demographic shifts, changes in cultural norms around church attendance and participation. So we're seeing declining participation in many congregations, met simultaneously with this hunger to belong. Culturally, people feel disconnected. And so my vision is that we become drivers of our own future, that we cannot continue in many places to just do what we've always done before, which means we need to have really hard conversations about what we do feel called to do, and that our actions moving forward need to not be out of habit, but out of intention. And that requires us to listen to one another about our sense of calling, about our concerns, our hopes, our aspirations for our movement, for our congregations and mission centers. And so these types of deep conversations where so I work at a Jesuit university, and one of the principles in my university is giving the conversation the time it requires. And so creating space and time to have these really hard conversations about what's important, what our sense of calling is, and how we organize ourselves around that sense of calling. That's where and to be honest, parliamentary procedure is absolutely necessary and
right.
such an important role. But to have those types of conversations in a parliamentary setting is really difficult. And so this is meant to be a decision-making process that fosters listening and listening with nuance. Ultimately, we may end up with decisions, and we need to use the parliamentary procedure to make sure we have assent. But this is meant to build on that, not replace it.
Yeah, so we could say Robert's Rules of Order is a way of making a decision, but this is a way of arriving to the decision.
Yes, that's a great way to express it.
So some congregations, this is all fine and good when I think of my home congregation here in the central area. But I also know that there are many congregations out there that are very small that are lucky if they have 10 to 15 people showing up to a business meeting. So how do you scale something like this to a smaller group?
So actually, I developed this process with small congregations. The question became, how do we scale it to World Conference? That was the challenge we were facing. I started using this first with small to medium-sized congregations. And while I live in the Kansas City metropolitan area, I spent a large portion of my life in congregations outside of this area. And so when I developed this resource, I was not thinking about congregations of 200 people. I was thinking of congregations with 25, 30, 40 people. And so it can work for both how you gather information, how you lead the meetings may differ between those. My experience is in a very small congregation, the dynamics that cause the division are are every bit as present. You have
Absolutely.
dominant voices, and that dynamic I talked about of chocolate versus vanilla, chiefs or no chiefs. If you've got a group of 10 people, it's really hard to hide if you're not in favor of the proposal in front of the group. And so creating space where we talk about what's important to us first is really important, even if the group is small.
So the main thing is having a leader there who knows these 6 steps and knows some of the strategies on how to move through those steps.
So one of the dilemmas we've always had, and the Common Consent team talked about this for a long time. I believe this works best when you have a trained facilitator. Not every group has a trained facilitator, but what a trained facilitator brings is a trained facilitator is listening. Number one, they're not invested in it personally. So they are attending to they're an advocate of the process, not one outcome. And so they are listening for minority voices, and they're making sure that every perspective is heard. A trained facilitator is usually naturally gifted at synthesizing and helping the group work their way through a process. A leader can use these 6 steps, but if the leader has been an advocate for one outcome or another, they may need somebody more neutral
Right.
to guide the process. And that's why I think a trained facilitator is useful, even if they're just consulting on the process, to help you think through how the leader can help the group reach a decision without the group feeling like the leader is pushing them toward an outcome.
This would be helpful in a mission center to have someone identified as a trained facilitator who could not only help in the congregations, but also help prepare congregations for something along this line.
So when I was co-chair of the Common Consent team, Sandy Gamay was the other co-chair, and Sandy has invested decades in building a network of trained facilitators, people who are knowledgeable about neutrality and leading decision making, and so there are many people in many mission centers who were trained through that initiative that Sandy led, and that's a great spot to start.
Yeah, so a good suggestion to all those who are listening that your first stop might be your mission center president to find out if there is someone trained in that area. The other part of this that I think is really important is also the spiritual practices side. I find every time I've gone through this, maybe the most helpful part is the stopping for a minute and going through a spiritual practice together and just spending some time, especially if we're dealing with those things that, the divine push, as he said, is necessary for the decision making on that particular topic. So this is another good opportunity to have an evangelist or someone who is good in leading those kind of spiritual practices to also be present.
Absolutely. If I were starting this process in a congregation or mission center, I'd start with a team, and I'd look for someone who's a skilled facilitator, someone who has a gift at spiritual practices or discernment, and then someone who can help shape the proposal that the group is starting with. And so getting that team together and plotting out your process. Every group is going to look different. At World Conference, we have to do it in 3 or 4 sessions within a 1-week time. I wouldn't advocate that in a mission center or a congregation. I would probably spread it out over some time.
Yeah.
It could take 6 months or more. And
Right. And especially if folks know that these are the 6 steps we want to go through.
Yep.
And we might not get through step 1 in our first meeting. Yeah.
Right.
To know that there is a process to important decision making that we wanted to spend time in.
So I'm glad you mentioned that. One of the things I've discovered when I'm working with a group is one of the challenges for a leader is explaining to everyone what we're about to do. What are the six
Yes.
steps? And so I took this leader's guide that I've shared, and I made a really short version of it that could be shared with participants who are about to go through the process. So a very simple way of saying, this is what the six steps look like, so that everybody has a shared understanding of what they're about to engage in before they start it. And that's also available on my website. I don't know
Oh,
what the
good.
coupon code works on that. I'll have to go back and check that. And I actually don't sell that by, I sell it as a license. So like for a certain amount of money, you get up to 25 or 50 copies of it. So the idea being one purchase and then you share it with everybody. And that comes as a PDF too. If that's
Well,
of interest to people, they're welcome to contact me about it.
and that's great, having the expectations put out there initially. I think it's really helpful. Well, not many questions tonight, but I did want to state you said that that those who take the time together are more invested in the decision. I really think that sums up what we've talked about here the last couple of weeks, and really appreciated you sharing in that. Anything else you want to share before we go close?
Well, part of the reason that I've taken the time to do this is I care deeply about the culture of our faith community. And one of the things I'm really hoping to help is to create a culture of shared decision making. Because I believe how we make decisions is a part of our witness to the larger world. So I'm hoping that by sharing some of what we developed for World Conference and what I use with small groups can help move us toward a culture of shared decision making. So that's
Yeah.
my hope for us.
Wonderful. Well, you're a blessing to the church, Kelly. Appreciate your time spent with us as well as your time spent on this.
Thank you so
All right.
much for everyone spending the time to listen.
Great. Good to have you too.